Okay, you all good? Let's do it. Hello and welcome to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast.
You're listening to the B2C Lead Gen Podcast. My name is Daniel Hopewell, here with Simon Delaney, and this is episode 117. Are lead buyers insane? So there's a very famous and often quoted Einstein definition of insanity, which is essentially doing the same things over and over and expecting different results. And today we're going to look at that idea in relation to lead buyers, examine one, if they suffer from this, and two, why that might be the case. So to begin with, Simon, let's start with the idea that, are lead buyers reluctant to change what they're doing, and why might that be the case?
I thought you were going to say, "Are lead buyers insane?"
So you can answer that if you want, if that's easier.
Yeah, that's far more difficult. So some are not insane. Some are reluctant to change, and I've listed out some reasons why, and I will quickly divulge this to you. So I would say the first thing is they probably don't know how to improve it.
Through the lead buy-in process, you mean?
Yeah, just like how to improve it. So they've got a set process or a set system, set type of leads, whatever coming in. It might have been inherited from someone else or something that was set up. And it's just running all the time like clockwork, and they just don't know how to improve it. They can't, they don't have either the resources, the people, the technology, whatever it is, to start thinking about, like, how can we actually improve this? It might feel like too big a job. They maybe just don't, we take it for granted that we talk about this stuff all the time. A lot of the people that listen to this podcast, a lot of the guests that we have on, we all know this subject matter quite deeply, right? Like, to us, we can sit and talk about relatively complex issues really easily because we're all understanding what we're talking about. So we can mention acronyms, we can talk about feedback loops, we can talk about measuring things at a granular level. If you get if I get a lead buyer in from a big advertiser and start talking about some of this stuff, and I do it all the time, it's literally like I'm reading the Epic of Gilgamesh in its original language. And that's what I'm talking about. Like, they just don't know how to improve it.
Yeah.
Okay. Number two would be they're just stuck using the same software. So this is some like winky wanky internal stuff that someone built, Johnny, in the tech department 14 years ago. And the thought of changing that is just so painful that they can't do it. Or, they're using something like a dialer or like an archaic CRM from the past. And this happens. I come across this sort of thing all the time. And the reluctance to change it is, again, because it's kind of working, even though they know it's broken, but they'd rather keep a broken system that's hindering them in some ways than actually, pull the rug from under their feet and go for something new. Number three is just a old classic. This is the way we've always done it. Like, it's almost an ego thing, that, right? It's like, this is the way we've always done it. How can we be wrong? And you find that in every walk of life about lots of different things. Number four would be a sales and marketing misalignment. So let's say it's marketing buying the leads, and they're tasked, or it could be sales as well, with buying a certain amount of leads. And the sales team or someone in the sales team is then tasked to get a certain level of results. You need to combine those two things. You don't separate them. So you can't have a quota you've got to hit of leads and go, you've got to hit 20,000 leads a day. Like, that's the target no matter what. And then they go to them, you've got to hit 4,000 sales a day. because, and they, you don't align the two of them, because this person getting the leads is just doing whatever they can to get leads at the lowest possible price, regardless of what the potential outcome is. And as stupid as that sounds, trust me, it happens a hell of a lot, especially at big companies. Number 5, they don't think changing things will make that much of a difference. So I've come across this relatively frequently. It's like, how much of a difference will that make? I'm like, well, I don't know, an extra 5%. Like, yeah, well, it might not. You're like, yeah, but yeah,
So it's about trading off like the effort required against potential, increase in performance.
Yeah, so I have conversations where I'll say to someone, like, how are you feeding back results to your suppliers of leads? And they'll go, once a month we download an Excel sheet, we get all the reasons for rejections, get a lead ID or whatever it is, and then send it back to the lead seller, and that's how we feedback the rejections. And I say, how about you set up a webhook that just gives them the outcome of every single lead, regardless of it's just rejections, but also like successful leads and, I don't know, appointment booked or whatever it is, so that they can start optimizing for the leads that convert and have positive outcomes, and they get the rejections in real time. They're like, yeah, but like, that's gonna be quite difficult, and how much of a return will it give us? I'm like, well, I can't give you an exact figure, but I can tell you it's going to massively change the way that you're doing things. There's, don't know, maybe not, might not.
Yeah.
Just, it works the way it is. It's that sort of conversation. Whereas the people that do it, it's an automated system that you just set up once and it runs, and everybody's lives become a hell of a lot easier and performance goes up. But, now this one, number 6, I've not numbered these, so it's difficult, but I would say is probably one of the biggest reasons. They base everything on the previous results of a broken system, which means they can't see beyond the results they've already achieved, even though it kind of feeds into what we were just talking about, actually, the previous point. So let's imagine that now you've had like a 10% conversion, but you've got like a broken system that's achieving those conversions.
Yeah.
And then you have a conversation which is like, well, you could get far better conversions if you use a different system. Like, yeah, no, we can't pay any more for a system or pay any more for leads though, because that's what they work out at, like night and day. They always convert at 10%, whatever. So that means that's the CPL we pay. And we can't ever change that, because we wouldn't be hitting ROI or CPA or whatever if we do that. And it's like, yeah, but the results are from the broken system.
Yeah.
Another huge one, just a huge amount of red tape to jump through, especially at bigger companies. Signing anything off, technology, new processes, systems, even working with new suppliers, deviating from the current model can be incredibly difficult. So people just don't do it because they can't get off the sort of hamster wheel at the time to spend 6 months trying to get something through, when what they're worried about is their job in 6 months and what they've got to achieve in the 6 months.
Yeah.
Because if you do something to impact the results in that time, you're not going to have a job in 6 months anyway. It's going to take you that long to force through whatever you want to force through. Decisions are made by committee. So, like a small company or relatively small company, it's quite like people can just make decisions, right? You can make decisions pretty quickly. Stuff can happen very quickly. You can be adaptable. But when you go into larger organizations or very, very process-driven organizations, it can be incredibly difficult to get things signed off, because you have to sit around a table of 5 people and all of them have to agree that this is something that should go ahead. and they'll each have their own motivations, their own concerns, whatever. So it's just the old adage, decisions by committee kill decisions. Just doesn't happen. And the other is they just want to pay the same money. Like, a lot of people are under pressure to just pay, given budgets. So it's like, here's $5,000 a month, go and get X. And so, if you want to introduce a new process or a new system or change the way you're doing things, you have to go and get a different budget, and it's the same sort of problem. People can be reluctant to do it. So when we talk about our lead buyers insane,
perhaps a bit harsh to term it that, but
yeah, it's less to do with being insane and more to do with there can be a huge amount of hoops to jump through. People's jobs can be on the line because they're not hitting results. Because we all know if you change something, there's a period of uncertainty where things happen. Or imagine you just don't know how to improve it. We imagine that everybody who buys leads is sitting listening to this podcast. That's certainly not the case. Or sat on LinkedIn reading stuff about how to do things. Almost certainly they're not. So it's it's an educational piece.
I think there's a couple of bits there I want to come back to. The first is that phrase hamster wheel, because I think that kind of covers all the problems in one form or another, all the reasons why not. It's this almost fear that if they sort of slow the hamster wheel ever so slightly, terrible things are going to happen. So you just keep it going. So getting off is something we talked about before. But also there was something you said, I think it was point 3, which reminded me of the old adage, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Now, maybe this is more a case of not understanding that things are broken, but regardless, it's almost like if it's not broke, how do we improve it, whether they've got that mindset or not. So I guess sort of bringing those two things together, if people are listening, how do you get off the hamster wheel? And do you think they are just happy coasting, or do you think it's about striving for improvements when things are actually okay, and do they need to do that?
I would think that most people in their jobs want to be successful, right? Like there's probably an element of coasting, but if they can actually be successful, they'd probably choose that option.
You say that as a CEO of a business. Let's imagine the person who's listening to this isn't a CEO, hasn't got shares in a company. They've just got a job and a salary. So yeah, they want to improve, they want to earn more money, sure. But the fear of losing your job in that time is probably outweighing the risk you want to take to improve. Like some people might just be thinking, no, I want to just get my cash and not get fired in the 6 months it takes to do this. So I understand, we just look at it from their perspective, I guess.
Yeah, I know a lot of people at different companies, especially large organizations, and what they want to do is never be too successful and never be too crap, for want of a better word.
Why do they want to be successful?
They don't ever want to put their head above the parapet. So they don't ever want any focus, because if you don't get focus, you can just coast. And what they're ultimately coasting towards is a pension. So I know people have been
what's the danger of putting your head above the parapet? Because
like future expectations.
Oh, so it's like, if I do this too well, you're going to demand this of me every time.
Yeah, exactly.
I see. Okay.
It's funny. It's a funny old world, isn't it? But
that seems weird to me. But not the idea that I want to risk, the risk factor, trading that.
Well, and also the risk. Yeah, also the risk factor, because there's two. I think you're right. So one is future expectations. The other is, if you're actually going to be successful like that, you typically have to take some element of risk. Which means rather than being above the parapet, you could be below you could be crap, because that's what the risk is. So in that scenario, there's a lot of people who are in jobs for life. Think of like old public companies that have either turned private. There's a lot around. Think of like BT was like that, right? So a lot of those people were on final salary pensions still after they left. So they're on like huge amounts of money at the end of their jobs. What they don't want to do is ever risk that. Obviously, that's not the same as smaller companies. We're talking about huge organizations. Typically, they're buying leads, but outside of that, in terms of what you were talking about, how do you get off the hamster wheel? So number one would be like, you need to identify that there is actually a problem. This sort of goes back to the thing of, do they even know that there's a problem? So identification of a problem is number one. Now, what that is, well, how do you identify a problem? So what we're talking about is, we know at Databall that left to its own devices, on average, buying leads will lead to at least 35% of them, on average, that you will never be able to sell to for one reason or another, right? That we're not even including performance in that. That's just like, the average amount of leads that are going to be rejected. So what we're looking at in that is, how many people can't you contact where you get the leads? How many bad email addresses, how many bad telephone numbers, how many wrong people, how many bots or IP fraud, or how many bad addresses, how many bad leads effectively, how many out of criteria, dedupe, suppression, whatever. And then in terms of performance, it's a tough one, because if you don't know like how to improve it, like, how can I tell you to prove it? I mean, we could go over the same things that we've talked about before, but somebody like this that we're talking about is probably, like we said, it's like reading the Epic of Gilgamesh to them. They're not going to understand fully what that all means. So what I look at is probably the flat line that you're on. How long have you been on it for? Have there been any attempts to improve it? Because what they'll be doing, almost certainly, I know companies like this, so I can talk about it with confidence. They're converting at like 4%. They'll just flatline like it for years at a time, and that's what they're looking for. And they might have to change them, like buy more leads if their flatlining goes down, or very rarely it ever goes up. So it's this strive for a higher flatline potentially, or slight improvements, rather than giving anyone massive improvements can scare them. So but anyway, it comes back to this identification of a problem. The other thing would be a mindset shift, which is just this is the way we've always done it, or, to your point, if it's not broken, don't fix it. What about like actually improve it? So it's not like it needs fixing, it's not broken, but you can improve it, you can get better results. And the third one is it sort of comes back to that thing of like the problem of sales and marketing, or someone having one set of targets and another person having another, which is like, if it's hitting targets, why change? But what are those targets? Can they be improved? So the person who's tasked with buying the certain amount of leads per day, his or her targets are not aligned with the end sales results. What are those targets? Are those targets like really mediocre? Can they be improved? Can they be changed? So it's sort of those three things. So rather than going into like the tactical reason how you do it, I think getting off the hamster wheel involves like analysis of one of those three problems, probably.
Yeah.
If all that makes sense.
No, it makes sense, but I guess what I kind of want to end on is, well, something like a scenario. So imagine like we're one of these people who is coasting, is on a hamster wheel, so to speak, maybe someone working at a brand, and they're thinking, look, I want to improve a little bit, but what I don't want to do is agree to a 6-month transformation where I might lose my job and have to rehaul everything, and it's like, a massive big thing. Like, let's just say for now we're not talking about everything in one go, but I just want to make a small incremental improvement. I want to sort of just dip my foot in a tiniest little bit just to sort of see whether I can make a small change that I'm doing, how I'm doing stuff, and then sort of scale up. Like, I'm not asking for suggestions to sort of transform the whole process, but if people are listening, there are a few things they can do just to begin with, just to sort of start to make small improvements.
It's quite difficult to answer without like the context of what their current situation is. Because obviously I'd have no idea what they're doing, but one of them would be definitely, I'd give two that you can do relatively easily. So one would be the sort of feedback loops. Whether you're still doing that manually or whether you're going to automate it, ideally automate it, but start to look at the giving all the results back rather than just the rejections. And what you're looking for is, are the number of rejections that you're sending back each month going down rather than up, or flatlining? Because if they're going down, it means that, not just rejections, positive outcomes, are they going up? Because what it means is that the lead generator or lead seller that you're sending the results back to is actually using that information. So I think that'd be quite useful, that a lot of people don't do, should be relatively simple. The other would probably be like more analysis of the data. So, because I know a lot of companies don't do this as well, is because I'm just thinking of like really simple things they can do potentially, like on a spreadsheet or something, right? Depending on what their setup is. We're in like an imaginary scenario. And that's just looking at all the positive outcomes that you have, whatever they are, sales, appointments booked, yada, yada, yada. Who's over-indexing on them? Which source of data is providing more of them? And then tie that back to the cost of that as well. So either total amount of data and sort of operational costs behind it. Because by doing that, you'll immediately get an insight into probably where you need to put more of your budget, because they're just getting better. Like, it's not like you really have to change anything. You just sort of go, okay, we know from supplier A, in this particular scenario of subsource D, we're getting much better results. So if we pull some of the budget from this worst performing one and put it there, we'll see much greater results. And just to let you know, the scenario I'm thinking of is, and I see this all the time, there is a buyer just categorizing like total leads from all sources in the same way. So they just go like all Facebook leads, for example, or all, I don't know, competition leads, or whatever it is. So doing some sort of data analysis on that would yield strong results very quickly.
Cool. Well, I mean, it's interesting that, like, I know it's a slightly facetious podcast title, but hopefully we've used that to kind of dive into a little bit into the mindset of lead buyers and kind of have a look at how they approach these things. And hopefully
it'd be interesting to hear from any lead buyers if there's any other things, like if anyone's got any of the reasons why, or maybe it's off the mark and they go, actually, we can just do what we want, and we've set all these great processes up, and
can't be asked.
Yeah, we just, we know that it's as good as it's ever going to be, and whatever else. So yeah, it'd be good to hear on that. And we have a when I say feedback form, we have a form that we put out on LinkedIn. We send out on like the email list that we notify of the podcast where people can fill it in and ask questions or ask questions for future podcasts. So if you have anything, please fill it in on there.
Sounds good. Cool. That was episode 117. Are lead buyers insane?
Thanks for listening to the B2C Lead Generation podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe to hear more from those at the very cutting edge of the lead gen world.